Welcome to another 21st briefing. This week in Trenton is not going to be just about the budget. Most of what's going to happen connects to schools and transportation. So this is going to be more about whether the state is actually keeping track of the systems it already pays for, and whether school districts and communities are going to be asked to carry more without much support. And the first item on is special ed oversight. Assembly Education has a hearing on special education services connected to a bill A1646. And right now, private schools that serve kids with disabilities, they're called APSSDs, have to submit annual audits, part of how their tuition gets set. And the state's supposed to look at those. But bill the bill's own language says it's really not uncommon for the commissioner to take 20 years or more to finish that review. I had to read that like several times. I don't think that's a typo. So the bill's going to cap that. If it passes, the state's going to have 7 years to act on it. And if it doesn't, the audit automatically gets approved. So the real question is, what does it mean for oversight if the state takes 20 years to look at audits for schools that are serving some of its vulnerable students or most vulnerable students? And with the DOE, that's really not hard to believe. Just take a look at how long and what influences come into play for things like ethics violations in hearings. Moving on to NJ4S, which is which in and of itself was a redesign. And they're going to hear, or the Joint Committee on Public Schools is going to hear testimony on potentially shifting from that to something called Spark, which is what the governor is currently thinking about, which is going to, if it does move forward, districts are going to look at another transition in how student mental health is built. And so the question really is whether families and schools are going to know what's going to change, when it's changing, if access is actually going to improve, or if this is going to be, another year figuring it out as you go. Next up is retired school staff. Currently, superintendents, admins, certified school nurses who are retired can be rehired by districts, but they can't work there for more than 2 years unless the DOE commissioner signs off on that. So there's a 2-year cap. This is going to get rid of that cap. They're going to provide more flexibility in letting those folks stay longer in their position. And that kind of makes sense for nurses, especially where, shortages can sometimes have an impact. But it does kind of raise a bigger question on, how schools plan for succession. If they have to keep rehiring folks who are retired, although sometimes school districts do that to save a few bucks for the current budget year. Dress code and tardiness, Bill A1728, is going to prevent schools, if it passes or gets approved, from turning a kid away because of a dress code violation or because they're late. There's a carve out in the bill. So if a kid shows up wearing clothes that is throwing off gang signs or signals a gang affiliation, not gang signs, a gang affiliation, uh, you know, obviously schools can act on that, and it doesn't wipe out other student conduct. So basically, the basic thing here is that being late and a uniform violation isn't going to be a reason to keep a kid out of school. Whether you agree with that is another matter. Farm to School sounds like a neat program, a grant program that's going to set aside 4.5 million. 4 million is going to go to districts. 500,000 is going to be set aside for the administration. And grant amounts are going to depend on how big the district is. Smaller districts can get from 10 to 50K, mid-sized districts up to 125, and larger districts get up to 250,000. Not a big dollar item in the grand scheme of things in the big New Jersey budget, but it's a good example of how Trenton can add things, have schools apply for them, and report on them. Hopefully there's a net positive to this. I suspect it's probably going to serve communities that have more of an agrarian feel to them. Data transparency is next. There's going to be two bills, maybe not getting a lot of attention, but they're important. A3390 is going to require the Division of Consumer Affairs to build an open data portal that allows people to look at licensing applications, processing times, complaint data, that kind of thing. And A4275 is going to create a statewide tracking system for permits and certifications so people can check on those without having to call or file an OPRA request. Opacity isn't just about like hiding secrets or conspiracies. Sometimes it's just this mundane stuff that people just need, and there just isn't a system to deliver it to them. A big item is bridge infrastructure and local government. We just wrote about this week about all this stuff coming due. Um, anyway, local governments are sitting on bridges and roads that they pay for in their communities that serve a larger system outside their communities. A1548 is trying to get a handle on what that inventory looks like before the next thing breaks or fails. So the bill, again, 81548, is going to create a 5-year pilot, 9.5 million, and it's intended to build a better picture of bridge conditions across state, county, municipalities. Includes a risk scoring model, climate vulnerability assessments, public dashboards, and an AI sensor monitoring. That's going to get a little bit more. That last part is going to get about 5 million of that 9.5 million. Another 4.5 is going to go to the pilot itself, and and the underlying problem, as we wrote about last week, is that New Jersey has a ton of aging infrastructure that's all coming due, and it still doesn't have a good handle on what needs to be fixed first, what the priority is. So if you look at this, a lot of this is sort of tied, especially the school stuff, state build stuff, fund stuff, sets rules, and then actual implementation lands on local districts, towns, and families, which actually isn't a big thing. You want local control on those areas. You want communities to be able to implement state mandates as flexibly as possible. Uh, However, the money needs to be there. And so the question this week isn't so much what Trenton is funding, it's more about what it's tracking, auditing, and what it's leaving for everybody else to sort out or pay for. Have a great week. See you next Monday.